Welcome to Anita Talks History and Genealogy. I'm so glad you could join us. Um, Please hit that like, subscribe, share button, and comment. And share. I want you to share this with, you know, with your community, within your community, because our history should not be a mystery. And today, I'm sharing from my book, my first book, Notes and Documents of Free Persons of Color. And the reason I'm sharing from it is that there's so much detail in it. And most of the time when people buy my books, which are available through me or through Amazon or Barnes and Noble and many bookstores. But the notes and this particular version is more, like in the libraries, it's usually in the reference section. Because when I wrote this book, I was making sure that I documented it, and making sure that I cited it. So it looks more like a reference book, So what I want to share about it is that I put a lot of information about why I called it, I wanted, folks to know why I called it Free Persons of Color. And the reason that I did was because the communities that my ancestors lived in Virginia, where, most of the book is based on my ancestors who were in Virginia. But I and my mother and her people on my grandfather's side were from Pennsylvania or lived in Pennsylvania. But again, you have to think about the fact that the borders were created. They were there long before there were borders, because they were indigenous people to that entire region. So if you were in Pennsylvania and you were native, you could go over those mountains and then you would be in Virginia. You could go another part, you're going to be in Delaware, and then you're going to be in Maryland. And, or you could just go across the border and be in Maryland, So that's why I wanted to share that, this book. So these people, they called us, when I was coming up in Pennsylvania, we went to a school called Houstonville and did not know it was a colored school, even though there were, 90% of the children in that school were colored. And then we had some Jewish people in the school. The Merritts, I remember Johnny Merritt. I remember, Irene Schallenberger. So we had Jewish students going there. And then we had a couple of poor white families going there. But the majority of the people who were there in my community in Pennsylvania were from Hungary. So they lived when they came, they built homes for them. They built neighborhoods for them that we, the indigenous people, were not allowed to live in. And they also went to private schools. They either went to the all-white Catholic school or a private Christian school. They did not go to Houstonville, which was a colored school. So they called us colored. My mother and her family went to a school, and her sisters and brothers went to a school, and they were the only people there, people of color there, and they were called the colored children. They called them colored. In their own, they didn't call them native or anything like that. They didn't call them African. They called them colored. And on the census, they are listed as mulatto. We were listed as colored on our birth certificates, but Pennsylvania went and took the time to change all that to Negro, okay? And I think some of them, they changed to black because they are in charge of the vital statistics. They are the ones that decide what race you are, okay? And so Notes and Documents of Free Persons of Color was about my some of my history growing up in Pennsylvania, and it's about Virginia, particularly Fredericksburg, because my family, my Virginia family, migrated to Fredericksburg. It was a place where you could go for employment, where you could, they lived, the community where the free persons of color lived was by the river. So, they could go fishing. They were, being native or indigenous, being around that river was important. That was where they made their livelihoods from. And they could go from shore to shore on that river, okay? And so that's where they lived. They lived in Fredericksburg primarily. It was a hub. So was Richmond. But I'm writing about Fredericksburg because that's where all of my ancestors converged. My Penn ancestor that left Amherst County, Virginia, wound up in Fredericksburg. My Lewis ancestors, who were descendants of the Nanzadigo Indians up in King George County, wound up in Fredericksburg. My ancestor Mary Bolden and her daughter, who were indentured service to the Washington family, wound up in Fredericksburg. So everything, they were all meeting in Fredericksburg. And that's where their stories were merging. That's where they merged, where they were intermarrying. They were neighbors in the same neighborhood. Patty Bolden, who was born before the Revolutionary War, she was the daughter of Mary Bolden. And Patty was she was born in about 1752. And I know all this information because they were listed in the inventory of the Washington family. So George Washington's brother, Augustine Washington Jr., and Lawrence were left the Washington plantation by their mother, who was Jane Butler Washington, and who died and left all the estate to her sons because she was the one that owned the estate. And Augustine Washington Sr., he married Mary Ball, who was George Washington's mother. And when he married Mary Ball, rumor has it that she did not want to stay there with his former wife's, children, where the father didn't even own, her husband didn't own nothing. So they went to Fredericksburg, where George Washington was born. And